Hey everyone, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever you might be listening to this podcast. I'm so excited to be interviewing Debbie Boone today. She is a veterinary practice consultant and she's been in vet med for a while, much like myself. So we're going to talk to her about her journey and some of the things that she's experienced, along with some practical tips of how you can influence your workplace for the better. Let's get into it.
Hey, Renee.
You've got so many great things happening. I'd love to hear about the book.
Okay.
A plug for the book for sure.
Okay.
And then we'll talk about some other stuff. So,
Okay. Yeah, because
yeah.
I'm also starting an association for veterinary CSRs. So that's
Okay.
the big thing is it's called the North American Association of Veterinary Receptionists. And we're going to do kind of a launch at AVMA this year because they've never had representation. They have never had a voice. And we are going to create a hub for them to have a community, somewhere they can go and have very specific education that works for CSRs and not instead of
Yeah.
just kind of the tail end of a lunch and learn. And and then maybe even work with this is what we're working on right now, is working for a track for fetch and for VMX for CSRs because they don't have any education. They don't have anywhere to go and get some outside learning. Hmm.
It would change their entire trajectory of
Absolutely.
their career in
We
vet
want
med
it to
if
be a
they
career.
had like a, a proper not, I don't want to say ladder, but just a
Yeah, it's a
pathway.
career
You
path. It's a career path
know,
up. Yeah,
exposure to different things, even if they stayed in that same role for
right.
their longevity, their career,
Yeah.
to have more skills and to do your job better.
Uh-huh.
Can you remember how ill equipped we were?
Oh
You
God.
know,
Yeah.
we were, you probably were decent enough to do your job, but
Yeah.
we weren't, you know, 20 years in, you
No.
know?
No.
Um,
Well, Josh Weissman and I had a podcast not too long ago, and we went, God, we wish we knew, as managers, as leaders, what we knew today, because we made so many mistakes and did so many things that now we look back and go, oh, I would never do that today. We'd never do that as a leader in practice. And but you learn people management, you learn hopefully wisdom as you experience failures and learn from that. And as you go along, you get better. Hopefully you get better. Some people never do. Some people never get out of this, controlling mindset and whatever. Anyway, that's
yeah.
a whole other topic.
Well, it's sort of on topic. What are some of the biggest, can you think of, either in life or in business, that you thought about? Biggest revelations that you've had?
I think one of the things is to realize that I didn't have to do it all. That what by delegating things that could be delegated to other people, then they had greater job satisfaction. And I actually had time to think of big picture things and strategy. Because the manager and the leader's job in the practice is to strategize the next big thing and not just sit and be a vegetable and not move forward, right? Just like you've got your board. This is where I'm going next. And so if I had realized earlier in the game that I could have leveraged some very smart people that I had on my team to do more things, then I think I could have moved the practice forward even more. I mean, we went from 2 doctors to 5 doctors with 3 locations as it was, but it was not until I got sick and had to be out of work for 6 weeks when I had breast cancer and surgery that I really pushed a lot of that stuff out to my team, and they picked it up. And then I never took it back. And that's the key, is don't take it back, because they did it fine, right? They did. But yeah, that kind of stuff. And the fact that that I was a coach, and I've always kind of had that way to work anyway. It was more of a coach, not a boss, but still setting probably better boundaries with people and giving them feedback more often than I did, positive and negative, you know. As I got older, it was more comfortable for me to pull somebody aside and go, okay, let me, this is, you know, I'm your trainer, so this is my screw up, but let me fix this. Let me help fix this. Right. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just listening to a person that I follow pretty regularly, and he was saying the same thing. He made some mistake where he would tell people, like, hey, keep up the good work. And then the next week he would have to let them go. And they're like, wait, you just said I was doing a good job,
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it was a skill he hadn't developed very well for himself to do the feedback and stuff. So you mentioned, I love the coach because that's where I always felt more comfortable in the people development part
Mhm.
as a leader, but and thinking of yourself as a coach,
Yes.
because I think when we do that, it provides us permissions, even if you're not familiar, like if you weren't ever an athlete or had experience with coaches, you have a frame of reference.
Right.
Whereas bosses and leaders, your only frame of reference is what you would see. And
Uh-huh.
so you would maybe model that, or you come up with your own, but it's all haphazardly.
Right.
Whereas a coach, you kind of know, like, they're not the player. They're, directing the ship,
Right.
but they're
Exactly.
developing the,
But
so
they're
there's
they're an
this.
expert in the skills and techniques, and they coach you. And last night, I don't know if you follow basketball, but my husband's a big Duke fan, and my mother, I grew up UNC Carolina. And last night they had Roy Williams and Mike Krzyzewski talking to the North Carolina Coaches Association and having conversations about how they coached and how they one of the funny ones, how do you work the refs? And then uh, how do you choose the players? And I thought this is how we should choose people, right? Because they choose them on talent, but they also chose them on how they treated other people and character. And I went, oh yeah, that's it. Because both of them said I was on recruiting calls to young men who were very talented players, and they treated their mothers badly and they snapped at their moms, and both of them said, we're done. If that's how you treat your mother, you're not playing for me. And they walked out the door. And I thought, wow, that is really telling that they are willing to walk away from somebody because they do not have the character. He said, we developed excellent young men. And but we also brought in excellent young men because their parents had raised them that way.
Yeah, what's interesting about that is, and if I think it's in the culture code, they actually feature a basketball coach. But what's interesting when we look at professional sports and they go through, they're not just like doing a phone interview, bringing them into the locker room, having a 30-minute meeting and be like, okay, you're our player. Their process is over months,
Oh yeah.
right? They're observing them on the field. Then oftentimes they're going into their homes potentially,
Hmm.
but they're seeing them
Yeah.
themselves in different environments.
Yes.
And I think that would be interesting, that if we were to take on an interview process where we would not, you don't have to manufacture these
Uh-huh.
environments, you that exist, right?
Right.
Take them to a restaurant, go potentially, into their home, or
Yeah.
bring someone on a date or whatever.
Hmm.
Um, have elongated interviews, because I was just reading an article about that. And I if you read or follow leadership, like, you're going to come across this message, which is
Hmm.
that we hire for character, we train the skills.
Hmm.
um like you said, a lot of people, they're just kind of in the weeds, and so they don't get that messaging because they're not seeking it out or something. um but I think that would be really interesting. Is there a different format that we could
Hmm.
choose?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
But
honestly, we had a conversation. We did a vet partners panel discussion about doctors being paid on production. And Monica Dixon Perry and I were kind of the pro production people. And then there was Karen Felstead and I think Cindy Barnes who were anti production. And they were talking about doctors stealing cases from each other. And I said, that's not a production problem. That's an ethics problem. And you hired people who were inappropriate. Because if you hire somebody who is going to steal cases and hide records from their fellow teammates, then you've hired the wrong people on your team. And Monica and I both thought
Mm.
we never had this problem. Why? Because we interview people more thoroughly than that. And I can remember going through, and of course, this is the glory days, but we interviewed 32 veterinarians before we made a hire because we were very particular about it. And then they weren't the top of the students because sometimes the top students have no life skills. We hired for character, we hired for personality, we hired for the ability to have a conversation with ease with strangers. We took them to lunch and had an hour-long lunch with them. They met everybody
Mhm.
on their team. They talked to all the other doctors. So everybody had some input into whether they wanted to work with these people or not. And that's how, and then, they were coached, they were mentored while they were there, and they weren't just thrown in. My practice owner used to take, and we always hired new grads because we didn't want to hire anybody's mess, right? We hired new people. And he would take them into the exam rooms with old time clients that had been there forever, introduce them, and let them watch him work with these clients. And this is how we do it here, not just send them in there with the tech. So it is all about how we work with people after we hire them. We just don't abandon them and say, "Oh, here." But I've heard a veterinarian whose practice owner hired her, left for vacation a week after he brought her in, brand new grad. I'm like, "Geez, Louise, why would you do that to your patients?" Right? I wouldn't do that to a patient of mine. Anyway, there's a lot of horror stories
Mhm.
out there, and I'm sure you know them and have heard them. Mm,
Yeah.
yeah.
What do you when you think about like delegating and training people to hire, what is, when we look at these things, it's kind of twofold, right? There's like the logistics. You have to say, if you're delegating, you have to break it down into these things in order to give the project to someone else. And then there's the emotional part,
Hmm.
mental part,
Yeah.
where you have to let go of that. And hiring can be that same way, right? Because sometimes in hiring, you're not the only one making that decision, or you're not the only one involved in the process. You might have different leads or something like that who are they're doing the phone interview to get them in the door. Um, so when you look at like what's say two simple things that a leader could train for their supportive parties, like whether they are, their subordinates or a peer, like if they're co-managers, we see that a lot, right?
Hmm. I think one of the things that we need to be aware of is some of our biases because we have a tendency to want to hire people that are like us, but sometimes we hire too many people that are like us. I can remember doing a disc profile talk, and a practice owner messaged me in the chat and said, "Well, should we hire just all compliance type personalities?" I went, "Oh my God, no! You would never get anything done because you would just be making lists and perfecting things to the nth degree, and nothing would ever happen in your practice. We need a little bit of everybody." But obviously, the first thing we have to coach people on is not to ask illegal questions and know what they can and can't answer. But for me, I think where people miss the mark the most in interview process is they need to hire people who value what they value. And if you don't know your core values, then how are you going to hire people that match your core values? And you can ask questions. I keep my core values on a bulletin board right here in front of me. And I look at that and I think, okay, it's connectedness, responsiveness, integrity, professionalism, energy more than anything else. So if I want to hire somebody that feels the same way I do. And one of my core values in practice is being open with people. And I want to know how open a conversation they can have when I ask them a difficult question. And I love to ask veterinarians, particularly, this is my favorite question for them is, tell me about a time when you made a mistake and what did you do about it? Because by nature, they are perfectionists and nobody likes to admit they screwed up. But I want to see if they bring something to mind, if they tell a complete story, And then I want to see how they handled it. What did they do about the mistake? Did they, did they go cry in the corner? Because that's not appropriate. Did they say, you know what, I realized I needed to get some coaching and I needed some mentoring. And so I went back to my books and I went back to my professor, or I went to my practice owner and I said, I don't know how to do this. Can you show me how again? And that's what I want to see, somebody that proactively takes ownership of their own mistakes to move forward with them rather than just fall apart because of them. So we need to be sure that we're teaching people to ask good questions. And one of my favorite books on the topic is How to Hire the Right Person for the Job Every Time, and it's written by somebody named Lori DeVella and Lori Kuzmark, and they were both HR experts, but they have a whole core values list. And then you can pick your core values, and there's a list of questions underneath the core value that reveals those core values. So we could just take that kind of, I call it my hiring Bible, and ask good questions and realize that we've got to find the match. Because even if you have somebody who is technically excellent, if they don't
Mhm.
believe what you believe, then they're a poor fit. And I give the example of, if you have someone who is um excellent technician, but in her core belief, heart of hearts, she thinks that the quality of medicine that you're practicing is too expensive, that you should be giving away much more of your services than you do, that, we are charging people too much, then she's probably not the one to be in an AHA accredited specialty hospital. She probably is a better fit for an animal shelter or the Humane Society environment, because that's where her beliefs are. And we need to make sure that that matches up, and we forget to get into that, like, what do people really feel about the profession, and what is the reason and their purpose of being in our profession and doing what they do.
Yeah. I like that so much because I often include core values in my presentations, but I do it in a way because we have our own core values and then we have our organization core values. But those core values have to be updated.
Mhm.
What matters to you now might not matter to you in 5 years or 10 years.
Yes.
Those things are going to change. And if we're not updating them, think about a mission statement of a clinic. Chances are that mission statement was, when ground broke on the clinic,
Exactly.
and then they just carry it for the next 100 years.
Right. And then
It's
they
not,
probably copied it from somebody else, because they looked at somebody else's site and said, okay, that's my mission statement. Yeah.
and they're outwardly focused,
Mhm.
right? They're pretty generic. We want to provide high quality care to the animals.
Great
End of story,
customer
right?
service. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and I hope that you do. I hope that you do. But the inward, like what what do we want it to feel like?
Mhm.
What is that meaning for me?
Mhm.
And do I believe, like, if we choose a word, does that word mean the same thing that you're saying that I'm thinking?
Exactly.
Because it might not.
No.
And that's okay,
Yeah.
right? But as long as we have awareness around it, um and and sometimes that, if it does change, let's say there are a lot of transitions in vet med, whether it's change within the hospital that's just going to change, or sometimes we see a lot of these days partnerships
Mhm.
where the clinic is now partnered with another company and that change is happening. How do you manage, or how do you like to manage emotions around some of this change?
Yeah.
And if things do get updated, like the core values get updated and they no longer match mine, um, you know,
Right.
like as a
Yeah.
coach.
Well, one of the things that I like to do, especially with core values work, is to not only talk about core values and what they mean, but how we manifest those every day. And when we look at core values, I just did a workshop for a VNG group out in California, and many of the practice owners were there, and one of their core values was compassion. Okay, that's great. But let us think about compassion in the clinic context. So, does that mean that my team can show compassion to people to the point where they give away all my services? Because that's a possibility. So, we need to qualify what compassion involves in that practice. So what I usually like to do is I limit core values to at least, like 5 or 6 words. If you get too many, it muddies the water. We really want to distill it down. And then we say, okay, one of our core values, let's say, is positivity. So how do we manifest positivity in ourselves? Well, okay, I'm gonna show up to work with an attitude that says, I'm excited to be here. I'm gonna help my team members. I'm gonna be all that I can be while I'm here, and I'm going to leave the baggage at home. Well, how do we manifest that to the clients? Well, then I'm going to show an outward appearance of being happy to see them and greet them. How do I do that to the pets? Well, I'm always going to be positive, no matter how difficult the animal is. I'm going to be positive about how I can get a response from it. What about to my community? What is the picture I show to the community when I'm out at the grocery store wearing my scrubs with my logo? And how do I show that? Well, maybe I open the door for people. Maybe I give somebody the extra dime they need, that they're digging around in their purse for you. Here, take mine. So these are the things that we can live our core values, but we have to understand and we have to talk about how we live them, because if we just say, okay, our core value is positivity, we're going to think, okay, I'm going to come in like a cheerleader every day. But that's not so at all. So if we pull the team together and we just sit here and do the work, which rarely happens unless they bring in somebody like you or somebody like me, because you don't know what you don't know. You don't know how to work through these scenarios. But the team is very good when they're engaged at figuring this out and really building a lovely, lovely ladder for each component of personal care, practice care, client care, and community care when we talk about the values that we live. But it's work that needs to be done. And I think a challenge that all practices have, and you know this as well as I do, is time. And I will have
Mhm.
practice here. We don't have time to do this. We don't have time to sit here. And so my question to practice owners is, okay, you don't have time to do that. Do you have time to do surgery? Well, of course, we book time to do surgery. Do you have time to take appointments? Of course, we book time to take appointments. Well, this is just important as that. So make time, book time, make it sacrosanct that you do these things. And when you do, you'll find that your team helps you reach your goals. Because if you don't get your team involved in where you want to go, that mission, that vision for the future, they can't help. And they may be
Right.
harming. Inadvertently, they may be harming where you want to get them.
Yeah. I call that shared success,
Yes.
because when they're apart, and maybe, for a lot of clinics, they're going to just start establishing this. Let's, if we really want to think big and say this podcast inspires them to establish a vision, you know, and how they want to attach their, like, what matters to them, right? Maybe there's someone in their clinic who, sure, they're a technician or they're a receptionist, but they love marketing and they want to be a part of the marketing. And so they're able to use their skills and develop their skills in that way. And then you have, 20 different people with 20 different interest levels, but
Right.
all might be tying to that future success. Um, so, what sort of indicators do you use to track progress when it comes to behaviors or culture?
What we're going to look at is a couple of things. Net promoter score. Do our clients rave about us? Have we fielded a whole group of raving fans out in the universe that insist that their friends come to our practice? So you look at your reviews, you look at what your clients are saying to you, and most importantly, you look at who they're sending to you, because we always tracked in our practice where our new clients came from and who referred them. And then we thank those people with a handwritten thank you note and some kind of a disc. Actually, we had a pet limousine service that would come to your house and pick up your pet and bring it back to the clinic. So we would give them a free limo ride as a thank you note. And then the other thing you look at is employee turnover, because I really believe that we do not have a problem with numbers in vet med. There are plenty of technicians, there are plenty of CSRs, there are plenty of doctors, but they don't stay. And the retention is the issue. So if you look at how long people stay in your practice and why they leave, if they leave for a promotion that you can't provide them, that's wonderful. If they leave for a goal that they set for themselves, like going to vet school or med school or nursing school, fantastic. Grow them and grow them out of your practice. But if they stay because they love the work and that you're supporting them and you're giving them growth opportunities, even if it's not technically a title, it is a way to learn more things and be better and have autonomy in their jobs, then they will stay. And that is how you measure success. Mhm.
I love that. And it's so meaningful to them to have that long term
Mhm.
and to have ownership over their own life,
Yeah.
like even if they're the leader in the practice, they're the leader of their life, and they feel, and that's one of those core values that I have seen even outside of vet med, of people, just the natural arch of life. You get to a point in your life where you want to have some ownership
Mhm.
over time, over how you spend your time,
Mhm.
over the type of work that you're doing in that time. And so it becomes incredibly meaningful for people to have some sort of skin in that game, you
Right.
know?
Yeah.
Mhm.
I mean, there's a
Wow.
lot of places, there's a lot of roles within practice. And if we get to know our team, and I really struggle with managers who are not in the building and not walking around and hide in an office and don't know their people, because I knew what my people liked to do and what they didn't like to do. And I tried to give them assignments that they enjoyed. Now, they can't do that 100% of the time. But if you can get 50% of their day involved in something, if they love inventory, God bless them. Let them count inventory at least 50% of their time. But if they love social media or if they love talking to clients, if they're really good salespeople and they are good in the rooms, let them do that most of the time and don't stick them in surgery if that makes them uncomfortable. So we have to know our people. And that's not to say that we don't upskill them, but that says
Sure.
because personalities are different and the things that people like to do are very different. I had a conversation yesterday with Owen McCafferty, who was the consultant who helped our practice when I first started. And I laughed when I was 29 years old when I first met Owen. But he's very much accountant, math mind, and I appreciate that. And I can do the numbers, but I love the numbers. I love the people part of it. So everybody has to know what their best thing is and spend time in that best thing in order to be happy in their work.
Yeah. I think that's what kept me at my first practice for so long, was I felt that. I couldn't verbalize it back then, but that was there. Um, what about I think one thing that we hear a lot is communication, right? Do
Mhm.
you get that a lot from your clients? It's like, can you speak to us on communication? Do you get that a lot? We get
Absolutely.
that all the time,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And
Well,
it's what's cool is people are starting to become aware of
it,
these different personalities, and
yeah,
but there's still the, how do I communicate with different people? And
yeah.
this is even if you're not the leader,
Oh,
right?
absolutely. Well, everybody's a leader in some way, and you're leading yourself if you're not leading anything else. And so
Mhm.
you need to know, how you come across. There's a self-awareness aspect of this. And I can remember reading an article that Mel Serpreneur wrote, and she wrote an article that said I was a bully. She was a technician, and she said I was a bully. And then she kind of had this epiphany, and she talked about how she got herself out of that and realized what she was doing to herself and to others around her. And it had, a lot to do with how she had modeled leadership from other people who she had been exposed to. But I think that self-awareness part is really key because I was listening to Dr. Tasha Urich, and she wrote a book on self-awareness, and I heard her speak at the Veterinary Innovation Summit a couple of years ago. And she asked this question of the audience. She said, how many of you people think that 50% of the people out here in the world cannot drive? And 100% of the people raised their hand. Oh, yeah. And she said, okay, now look around because 50% of you can't drive and you have no self awareness. of that because you're the 50% people are talking about. And it's true. We think we're fine and everybody else is a hot mess. But sometimes we have to have an awareness of our own issues and our own challenges. And even thinking back to, can you move into an uncomfortable conversation? Because it's human nature to avoid conflict. Our limbic brain wants to keep us safe. And that's a good thing. It was, it's over evolution. It kept us from getting eaten alive by tigers. But now it sometimes doesn't make any sense because it's making us afraid of things that are not, that you should not be afraid of, that you have to move into. So when we learn self-awareness, we learn some self-talk, we learn how our brain works. And neuroscience is a fascinating subject to me. So I love to talk about how our brain is lying to us so often,
Yeah.
often. And then we can become self-aware and we can stop ourselves. I always call it the pause, no pun intended, but pause. And we say to ourselves, is this nonsense? Think about it logically. Because if you even think about client conflict, often people go off the rails, perfectly nice people all of a sudden explode. And it really is a limbic brain reaction that has hijacked the smart part of their brain. And the limbic brain part, which is the fear, flee, fight response, has taken over. And until we move past that and get them back down to logic again, there's absolutely no point in trying to explain anything to those people. You have to ride along with the crazy for a while. And you get crazy too. So that pause also comes with, don't let me react to this. It's not about me. It is about the situation. And I'm going to take my deep breath. I'm going to watch my body language. I'm going to control my response. And I'm going to ride along with this until these people come down to a baseline of normal where they can have a logical conversation again. Because a lot of times we want to defend, we want to win. And that takes such self-discipline and practice to learn. It's not
Mm.
about winning, it's about negotiation, and everybody comes out okay.
Yeah. That's I love that, especially when we talk about clients and
Yeah.
how we and what many people don't realize is that unintentionally the dispute is worsened when we do that.
Right.
But because they're not self-aware, they think it's all the client, right?
Exactly.
Like it's
Exactly. The
just them.
client is the enemy. The client has turned into the enemy. And I
Yeah,
really
but it has
believe that we
the
are
fact
setting
that like
on fire a lot
I
of times, right?
yeah, you
We are
get
starting
feisty
it.
with them.
Yeah,
Yeah, it perpetuates the cycle a little bit.
it
So you
does.
can, like you said, even if it's appears like they if you you probably do if anyone's interested in sales,
Yeah.
um they train you this in sales. It's like you agree with the person even
Mhm.
if you don't
Even if you
actually agree,
right.
but the moment you start to disagree you've lost them.
Yeah.
And so whatever the thing is, you start by agreeing. And even like attorneys and things like that will teach, they're trained in that way to communicate and to set the appearance that they're agreeing with you. And it's just that communication, and it's somewhat of a hijacking. It's like a ninja move because you're able to hijack the brain of the person who is
Exactly.
maybe, reacting,
Yeah.
and they don't realize it. But even if it starts to become not disingenuous. It becomes genuine that you, through empathy, somewhat agree with them that whatever the thing is that has upset them is valid in upsetting them. They're allowed that.
That's right.
Um,
That's right. And
so
sometimes I actually had a client say this to me when I first started managing the large practice that I was the operating officer. He said, I feel like I'm coming to battle. And I went, well,
mm,
why do you feel like that coming here? And he said, because, I feel like people won't listen to me. So whenever I had conflict with a client, and I've taught this for so many years, I would say, I am so sorry you're having this problem. Could you please start from the beginning and tell me your story? Because I don't know what's going on. and I'm going to make notes. And I would carry a pen and a pad in, and I would start to write notes. And people, you could just see them de-escalate because someone was taking them seriously. Someone was actually deeply listening, not just waiting to talk and refute what they were saying, but deeply listening to them and then asking those open-ended questions like, tell me more. And that doesn't mean that you are agreeing with them, but you can say, I see how it looks to you. I could see how that looks to you. And so tell me a little bit more about that. And it really isn't that difficult when you can control your own emotion and not want to defend. And I feel like that happens a lot because especially at the front desk and with the technicians, if somebody comes after our doctors, and we love our doctors and we know how good they are and how hard they work, and we want to instantly come to their, as their savior, we want to defend them as their knight in shining armor. But what we have to realize is we're not getting anywhere. We're just kind of beating our head up against a wall until we can de-escalate that client's hijack, and get them to the point where they're now will give you permission to tell your side of the story. And you ask that. You can say, is it okay if I tell you kind of what happened on our side of this story? And they're, yeah, I'll listen to you now, but don't try it before that. And that is the whole definition of emotional intelligence, is that we manage our own emotions, but we are also skilled enough to manage the emotions of others.
Yes. It's a wonderful, succinct close here as we wrap up. Just that it envelops it in that skill set. And so when we think about CSRs, to the beginning of our conversation,
yes.
I think investing, our resources in, or like our personal resources, our time, our energy, our awareness, in EQ. We just launched CVBP2 over last year, and that was one of the courses I put in there because EQ is, in my early days, that was one of those things that I recognized my emotions were a huge driver of me. I still am a very emotional person, but I've gotten a better handle on them. But I'll always be that emotional person. And even people who aren't, people who are stoic by nature, like we all have emotions, and it's overlooked sometimes. But I think in business, we're seeing it more.
Yes.
We're talking about more and the importance more. And even when we look to hiring, that's something we see more on resumes and strengthening resumes is how versed are you in these life skills? Because we get it. Like if you've got the technical skills, great. If you don't, I can teach you. How are we here? And you can learn those, but oftentimes those, I feel like, it's like when you train someone to look through a microscope, if you're seeing things like roundworms, you're seeing them every day, they're going to be able to spot those things. But if they're looking at things that they might see every 3 months, say like whipworms or something, it might be a little bit harder to diagnose. And life skills are that same way. You're going to use them very frequently. So you can develop the skills rather quickly, but there's always going to be compounding interest on that. So you're going to get better at it over time if you're using them. But if you are only using them every 3 months or only sort of tapping into that skill set every 3 months, you're not going to get as sharp as quickly.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and much data has been shown that high emotional intelligence is a greater indicator of success in life than high IQ. So it doesn't matter how smart you are, it matters how good you are with other people, because humans are naturally connected to each other. We live by our network. We grew up in bands and tribal units that collaborated with each other, and our skills and abilities to collaborate with each other is how we become successful in our troop. And so we have to know that this is an important skill for us to learn. And you think about, it's a lot of it is what you're exposed to as a child, Because if your
Mm.
parents are good at this, and I credit my parents for this because they were always in the public. I grew up in the middle of a restaurant and serving the public from the time I could walk, just about. And so I learned these skills at a very, very young age. And my father in particular was excellent at it. I mean, everybody loved my father. And so you learn those skills by seeing them modeled. But there are some people
Mm.
out in the world who never learn this stuff. And they go through life and everything is somebody else's fault and everything, they never get ahead and they don't understand why they're not successful, because it's not about hard work. It is
Mm.
about working collaboratively with other human beings well and having them want to help you become successful and lift you up. Because if you are somebody who is constantly belligerent and negative, nobody wants to be around you and nobody's going to help you get where you want to go. And I think that is such an important lesson for people to learn at a very young age, because
Mm.
they will struggle so much harder in life if they don't learn those lessons. And going looping back again to the book, these are things that are all talked about in the chapters of the book. And in each chapter there are multiple little exercises there, because the hospitality skills I'm talking about are exactly what we're talking about. Because somebody who serves the public well does tune in to their emotional intelligence, because they want to connect with other people. They want to make sure that they are getting good information. And, especially in a medical profession, if we're not good at asking good open ended questions, we're going to miss
Mm.
something very, very important when it comes to our patient care or understanding our client. And these skills are incredibly valuable. And of course, the book straddles veterinary medicine and human health both, because as a former cancer patient, I've been through a whole lot of human health episodes that I wouldn't foist off on anybody, but they could have been so much better. And then there were doctors and teams that were amazing at excellent hospitality. And so there's stories about that too. But I really feel like it's a piece of the puzzle that people don't realize, that it's almost like the light bulb moment when you realize, yeah, I love going to Starbucks where my barista knows my name and fixes my cup of coffee without me having to say what I want in it, because it makes me feel valuable and important. Well, if we could do that to our clients, our lives get so much better, because people just
Yeah.
think we're wonderful. And I used to laugh and say to my staff, when I hired people, I said, okay, the first thing that happens here is you will gain 10 pounds, because our clients constantly bring us food and treats, and at Christmas, look out, it's insane. But that is because we had built such fantastic relationships with people that they really felt like we were part of their family, and they brought us all this stuff all the time. And there was a lot of appreciation for the work. And I think that is so much of what's missing today, is we don't pay attention to the people who think we're wonderful, and we pay too much attention to the one or two in a month that are difficult or
Mm.
challenging. But maybe we could have handled those better and they wouldn't even be that way.
Sure. Yeah, like you said, they weren't trained, they weren't exposed. And so if we could just remember that even if we are getting trained, we have to remember that they're not in that lunch and learn with us. They're
No,
not in this podcast with us. They're out living their life.
that's right.
Um, so thank you so much, Debbie. This has been enlightening, and I know that our people will enjoy it. We'll put links to where people can buy the book. We can learn more once you're launching the association, which
Yes.
kudos on that. So much love.
We
You
are
and I will
very
talk more
excited about that.
about
Very
that.
excited
You can
about
help
that. Yeah.
elevate, our CSRs in vet med. Brilliant idea. And where people can find more of you, connect with you, all the
Yeah.
things.
That's great. I thank you so much. It's always a pleasure talking to you, and the work you're doing is amazing. So I feel like we're all chipping away at it, right? And it's getting better and the word is getting out. And compared to where we were 10 years ago, there's so much more information about how we can live great lives in vet med, because it can be a great, joyful profession, and I've loved it for 38 years, and I want to have everybody continue to love it long after I'm gone.
Yeah, I like that. We want longevity for our people if this is
Yes,
their jam.
that's it. That's it. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time out with us today,
You're
and we'll
welcome.
talk soon.
Thank you again for having me. Appreciate it.